Hey, everybody, welcome to What Drives Us One-on-One, Episode 8 for March 4th, 2020. My name is Russell Frost, and interestingly enough, Episode 7 featured this guy named Matthew Klippenstein. And here we are at Episode 8, not even very much long after, and who's back? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, our fuel cell expert, Matthew Klippenstein.
Howdy, A, from Canada.
Enough with the cute Canadianisms, okay?
Sure.
Yeah, what was Tim Hortons in the news? I get distracted by Tim bits.
Right.
So Matthew is, of course, and that introduction is far too narrow. He has been involved in a number of other things. Let's call him a sustainable energy expert.
Sure. That might be generous, but sure, I'll take it.
I can afford to be generous once in a while. Matthew brought to my attention a story that he, I think, now I say that, you put the story together, right?
Right. I put the story together on the Fuel Cell Works website, but there was a big announcement. That's right. So in classic battery fuel cell fashion, we had a big fuel cell announcement, which was followed by an even bigger battery announcement, which is, fair enough. I'm sure there'll be a lot of chat that I'll be tuning into on this evening's What Drives Us podcast about GM's major announcement, but also from the United States, Nikola Motors, the large Class 8 semi-trailer startup, it's a semi-trailer startup, which is proposing to use fuel cell vehicles and also battery electric vehicles for some of its shorter range routes, made a big splash yesterday, announcing a plan to basically become a public company. And we can get into the mechanics of that and also some of the new information that Nikola shared as a result of trying to convince, people that this is a good idea that should go forward.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about what happened so that we're clear on that. And that's certainly interesting. You have a great explanation for that. So Vecto IQ and Nikola Motors are now in an intimate relationship.
That's right. So the analogy I used is that if you think of Nikola Motors, a company, they want to go public, they want to have access to the public equity markets, and why wouldn't you? Especially if you're doing tech which is physical as opposed to software. Software is very capital efficient. You just code and then you distribute. There's no cost of distribution. When you're making physical things, it is helpful to have access to public capital. Now, the process of going public can be quite a long one. And so there's this market in the business ecosystem where you have these companies like Nikola, who are like hermit crabs looking for a new shell to live in. And there are these shells who are looking for new hermit crabs to occupy them. And Vecto IQ is referred to as a SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company. They basically have a stock listing, and they scout around to try and find out what companies might be suitable, who might give them a decent deal in terms of Vecto IQ makes it faster for Nikola to become a public company, and in return, Nikola presumably gives them a reasonable slice of the business, the value that results.
And we assume that, the obvious thing here is that Vecto IQ will then will fund Nikola's continued development of their electric trucks.
Well, actually, what's more likely to happen is that Vecto IQ, the management team there, so they have this public listing, and so they basically allow Nikola to take them over. It's a merger, but it's basically Nikola would be, if I understand this correctly, I'm sometimes wrong, Nikola would basically take over the Vecto IQ stock ticker. It would become, I think it's a NKLA, I think. NKLA. And so basically the benefit for the people at Vecto IQ is that they get the shares they have in their shell company now become attached to this new company that's come in, and they get a little bit of a payout for themselves as well. The idea would be that the management team at Vecto IQ would, help on with the transition to something of that sort, and then they would kind of go their separate ways as their shares cash out and so forth. So it's really not a case of Nikola merging and absorbing new business plans. It's more a case of them, moving. It's like a company moving into a new building almost. It's like, we want a new signpost. This old school IBM building becomes a Microsoft building, becomes a Google building, becomes a TikTok building or something like that. Yeah.
Sure. So this doesn't necessarily come with cash, but now Nikola Motors has the opportunity to sell stock to raise capital if they need
That's
to.
right. It'll have that ability if it so desires. I'm sure. I mean, if you're able to have a healthy valuation, it's never a bad idea to do that if there are people willing to pay the stock price. In the documents, they said that they would be closing the deal. They anticipate closing in Q2, so within the next 3 to 4 months.
Wow.
And certainly, when you're burning money, it is never a bad idea to have more cash on hand. Now, that said, Elon Musk has managed quite well for himself in minimizing dilution, but all the same, it does give another funding option for Nikola, which I'm sure they're very pleased with, and their investors as well.
Sure. The company allegedly or should be stronger by this strategy and give them more options. So
that's right.
So technologically, this doesn't change anything about Nikola. This is just really about reinforcing Nikola's place.
That's
The
right.
work at Nikola Motors continues apace on their fuel cell tractor
That's right.
and their battery electric tractor.
Exactly. That's right. And so I guess this might be a suitable place if you want to pull it up later.
Yeah.
I have my old batteries are exoskeletons chart. And what we have in that chart is basically showing that for smaller vehicles going up from e-bikes to passenger cars, some commercial as sort of heavy-duty vehicles, batteries are fantastic. And then with fuel cells taking the upper range of the ecosystem, if you will, from boats, planes, trains down to heavy duty and probably some light duty vehicles as well. It's rarely going to be a case of 100%, one technology takes a market, at least for consumer goods.
Right.
That said, I'm absolutely, I'm absolutely delighted at GM's massive investment. I am fascinated that that even though they added aluminum and they have an NCMA chemistry that they've talked about, they still do have the manganese in there. So perhaps some design factors, not to get too much into your next podcast.
No. That's fine.
Yeah, so it's fantastic. And so here we have, I guess, Nikola can position itself as being technology agnostic. They have in the shorter term battery electric vehicles that they'll be able to put in production, bringing in cash, bringing in some free cash flow, some gross margin, even though they'll probably be burning cash for a while. And then that will allow them more runway to commercialize their fuel cell vehicles for the longer routes, I guess, in particular.
Sure. And give time for the infrastructure to develop and whatnot.
That's right.
Else. I mean, the whole... you don't want to come to market too early with a product. No matter how good it is, there it sits. And
that's right.
People can't use it. They don't understand it. It's, you need context. You need infrastructure.
Exactly. So you need I think they call it the whole product solution in business parlance. I think the old example from our generation, too old for many listeners, will be how I think WordPerfect back in the day offered 24/7 free assistance. And that was the thing, because there was no real internet back then. It was people wanted to make sure they could use their word processor.
Sure.
And so with Tesla, with its infrastructure, with its superchargers, again, a very foresighted move to ensure that there was the infrastructure in place for everyone. And so yeah, it's one interesting thing that Nikola has done actually with its Badger. That's its battery electric and also offered as a fuel cell battery plug-in hybrid pickup truck, I believe, is that they've encouraged their fan base to do customizations or some sort of a self-design feature, which may bring in sort of audience participation, fan participation, which may lock in the customer interest a little bit more. It's one of the very few things Tesla hasn't capitalized on in its otherwise brilliant marketing strategy.
And obviously the numbers are still out on what they will and what they won't capitalize, what part of the market they own. That's certainly a constant
Right.
battle online.
That's right. That's right.
And the battle itself doesn't really interest me that much because soon enough we'll know.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So one thing that that was of possible interest with respect to the Nikola announcement, because they're now, I think, at least up here, we call it opening the kimono. You know, you're showing a few more of your cards with respect to now that they have to, now that they're trying to go public. So they have announced in their presentation. I'm looking at the slide 13 here. They have listed about a half a dozen companies. Presumably, these are companies, in addition to Anheuser-Busch, who have committed to orders for these fuel cell trucks when they come out. It's Coke, Walmart, Carrefour, Amazon, UPS, and Pepsi. And the interesting thing from a large sort of 50,000-foot view is that the first four of them, Coke, Walmart, Carrefour, and Amazon, all use fuel cell forklifts supplied by an American vendor, Plug Power. So it is interesting to see if I will be very interested to see as more of the customers become revealed, whether it's a lot of people who start off with forklifts, which are more productive than their batteries. We can get into that for at least certain warehouse applications, distribution center applications. And then now that they have this experience, it's like, oh, well, this has its own niche. We're familiar with it. Maybe we can extend now into a further application here on the more heavy duty side of the vehicle usage.
I mean, we've seen these tech gateways over and over again with hybrid, with the Prius hybrid blazing the trail to make mainstream, to make electric vehicles, which have been around for decades,
right?
But suddenly more appealing to a wider audience. Tesla certainly took that to another level, of course.
Right.
A question is Carrefour, is that a Canadian company?
Carrefour is a French, I think it's like a French grocery giant, that kind of a thing. So if you think of it, I'm not even sure what the grocery giants are in the States now. I think there used to be Albertsons, but I'm not sure if that's around, or Safeway. But it's kind of a large food retailer kind of an organization. Now, we can maybe get into forklifts a little bit to give people a little bit of a sense of why there's an interest by some of these companies in fuel cell forklifts to begin with. Particularly since many of these companies have had them for a few years back when fuel cells were much more expensive. And a lot of it relates to being efficient with your capital in your distribution center. In a typical lead acid battery served forklift facility, you will have maybe 7 to 10% of the floor space of the square feet will be devoted to a recharging facility. And typically, forklifts will operate for not quite 8 hours. They'll go out, they'll have a switching time where operators will be subjected to physical stresses of pulling out a heavy battery, putting a new battery in. Most importantly to the companies, if they can use fuel cells, they can drop that cannibalize square footage from maybe 7 to 10% to a couple percent, because they can use these just pipe drops at various places for operators to refill their vehicles within a matter of minutes whenever they run low on fuel. And so even though the fuel is more expensive, hydrogen is much more expensive than electricity on a per unit of energy basis, and fuel cells are less efficient at turning the hydrogen chemical energy into forward motion as batteries are from electricity. But the savings you get from opening up that extra space in your warehouse, from not having to buy more distribution centers, is highly valuable to the folks in the retail sector. This is more applicable to larger companies which are running 3-shift operations.
Right.
Like if you have a one shift a day, or maybe more of a 1 shift a day operation, yeah, batteries are terrific because you just park them at night. They charge, your electricity use is relatively balanced over the course of the day. But as you get to a certain size, then you see this impetus towards fuel cells. It also applies towards refrigerated segments as well. You'll note that Carrefour, Walmart, Amazon now, as you get to colder temperatures, batteries tend not to fare as well. You can use heaters, like
Of
coolant
course.
heaters, to keep the batteries warm and keep their charge up, but it is it's historically been another reason why grocery folks like Carrefour have been early adopters of the forklifts. And I
Interesting.
guess just on a technology basis, if I guess the one I'm most familiar with is the iPod. Like I got an iPod, then I moved up to an iPod Touch and an iPhone, and now I'm pretty much a Mac person. Um, and so even though Plug Power isn't the company with these fuel cell semi trucks, you probably do have this phenomenon where companies are comfortable around the forklifts. They're known variable. It's not scary.
Right.
We still face that with electric vehicles, which really frustrates me. But that's kind of the reality we have to deal with. Not everyone is as early an adopter as we like to think we sometimes are. So companies are familiar with fuel cell forklifts. They're familiar with using hydrogen. Okay, well these semi trucks they make sense. We kind of know how they work. They're safe and so on and so forth.
It's, we've on What Drives Us, we've talked about many times the diversity in energy storage and production is a good thing for everybody. And in this case, there are ideal uses for fuel cells in vehicles like these forklifts, for instance, that never
Mhm.
go that far from home. You only need
That's it.
one filling station. You can refill them in a few minutes, and as you pointed out, in a 3-shift operation, these things can go 24/7. There's no
That's
recharging
right.
period.
That's
Uh,
right.
so there's a lot. The cost may be higher in some ways, but in
Mm.
the end, it seems like a very efficient system, a very good way to do it.
Right. And I mean, if it wouldn't be, then they wouldn't exist in that market, right? That's the ruthless Darwinianism of business. Um, Now, so one factor which will come out as people read the presentation materials is that Nikola wants to start selling its BEVs of various sorts in 2021, which is fantastic. You want to have that early revenue, and 2023 is when it anticipates starting production, late 2023, I think, of its fuel cell trucks. And so there's probably going to be this sense that, okay, well, so the first real semi trucks with fuel cells, the first significant volumes are going to be on the roads in 3 years, which is forever. And you're going to have hundreds of thousands of battery electric trucks commercial trucks on the roads by then, perhaps millions well, maybe not millions, but you'll have a fair volume.
Probably. Yeah.
So at this point, it might be useful to forward the slide that I'd gotten from Ballard. And
Okay.
what I wanted to do here is just mm, show the fact that there are a fair number of, in this case, it's illustrating buses, but there are trucks as well, for which
Right.
the graph is highly similar, where Ballard, a company I used to work for up here in Canada, they sort of pioneered the fuel cell bus market. They have a dominant share in the Americas and in Europe. And the volumes, it's like on the order of like 60. Back when they made this slide, it was about 60 fuel cell buses operating in all the United States, about 100 in Europe. Um, but in China, there are about 2,000 fuel cell buses alone. And instead of them having a dominant share, they have like a maybe 20-25% share. A lot of the buses are being powered by sort of upstart, hard scrabble Chinese vendors who are maybe working with Western companies or first world companies, but also furiously developing their own low cost technologies. So it's exactly paralleling what's happened in solar and with batteries, in that China has an industrial policy. They're like, we'd like to master this technology platform, and so they're running all out to do so. One parallel with electric buses in particular is, if you go back to Wikipedia, I think it was 2009, 2010, when BYD produced its first, I think it was 600 or 1,000 electric buses, which were just a curiosity at the time. But of course, there is that industrial policy of the Chinese government behind it. And so right now, both in fuel cell buses, but particularly with trucks, class 6 commercial trucks, there is a strong push towards towards pushing a fuel cell technology in these segments. So
Hmm.
it's not that the first semi trucks, the first large fuel cell trucks will come to market in 3 years. There are thousands on the roads, at least of buses. I believe the trucks are well over 1,000 as well by this point. And the trucks, just like the forklifts in like the United States and Europe, they run 24/7. The Chinese government was a little bit smarter with its incentive policy, so you actually have to accumulate, I think it's like 30,000 kilometers before you can actually get your payout of incentives. So basically, the trucks are being used 24/7. They get rented or allotted to customers, and so the refill time is a great selling point in that regard. One other factor is that um, Shenzhen, where BYD is based, has never seen freezing temperatures. Lowest recorded temperature, I looked this up once, was 0.2 degrees Celsius, so like 32.3 Fahrenheit. And so there is also an interest, I've been told, by the Chinese government to emphasize fuel cell vehicles for buses, other heavy duty vehicles in the northern parts of China, which aren't tropical, basically. So again, this is a case where yes, Nikola's had this fantastic, very high profile announcement. Good for them. Good for the sector. Um, there are already thousands of fuel cell buses and trucks on the roads, not huge thousands, but in the several thousands, and that will only increase by the time that Nikola, hits its 2023 production goals. So they will be less of an intellectual curiosity, and more of a real thing, at least in certain early adopter regions, China in particular.
Right. And it's such a big market that that's
Mhm.
a great place to be, to be on that. So I have to ask you a question I don't really want to ask you, but I have to.
Sure, sure.
No, and
Oh, I should also note I have no
yeah.
investments in EV or fuel cell companies of that sort because it's kind of suboptimal for being able to talk about things if you're a shareholder.
At least if you're nice enough to disclose it,
Right.
there's more than enough stakeholders out there that aren't talking about their position.
Right.
So I appreciate that actually. And yeah, as everybody knows, I don't have any stock in anything. So I'm going to bring up the T word and
Sure.
and the timeline with
Mhm.
Nikola and their fuel cell and Tesla's maybe proposed, we call it,
Mhm.
timeline. I mean, uh, uh, do you think that Nikola has a chance? Is it the different technologies that give them some strength over Tesla? Because Tesla certainly has the brand name advantage. Uh,
Yeah. So I do think that Tesla obviously has a very strong brand. This is clearly the model that Nikola is following, right down to the choice of name of the company. Um, the so I would be confident that Nikola would be shipping some of its BEV trucks, its Class 8, I think, BEV trucks in 2021.
mm,
Unless that gets prioritized, depending on what Tesla's priorities are, I'm not so sure that Tesla's own trucks will be out in the market at that point. At this stage, you would generally expect a company to have a large number of mules running routes, gathering miles, and Tesla is very well known and effective for publicizing, every level of accomplishment and every milestone on the path. Have not seen as much of that with respect to the Tesla Semi. I'm talking about, in this case, about the shorter range vehicles. On the
right.
longer range side, I think the physics of battery weight will start to impair the proposition for the Tesla Semi. They haven't disclosed any, fantastic new battery chemistries. If they do, then that becomes more interesting. Um, I would think like the first move I would anticipate, someone might say as well, it's cheaper to use electricity than hydrogen, which is definitely true at the smaller scale. At the very large scale, with many vehicles, you can start to run into utility demand charges if you're like spiking usage. The counter to that is if your payload is lower, you actually have to get more trucks, which means spending more capital and having more drivers. And so this is a case where I think the payload efficiency, maybe we might call it, does give fuel cells an advantage or a sustainable advantage really over a pure battery solution. Again, for shorter range trucks, batteries are fantastic, absolutely fantastic. For the longer range vehicles, I would think that fuel cells would maintain an advantage. And we actually have a comparison from the fuel cell world where the dominant type of fuel cell technology, PEM, proton exchange membrane technologies, they use platinum. And people have talked for decades about, well, we can use this lower cost carbon or lower cost catalysts than platinum for these fuel cells, and wouldn't that make them cheaper? And the challenge is that if you have a free catalyst, but it's only maybe it only has half the performance of platinum, then you actually have to double the size of everything else in the fuel cell stack to get the same amount of power. And that is ultimately more expensive than just biting the bullet and having a bit of expensive platinum. So in the same way, the payload efficiency for larger vehicles, for larger missions, for fuel cells, I think does have an advantage, at least in the longer range trucking.
Well, and certainly there are companies out there. One of the largest companies on the planet that makes vehicles has refined their fuel cell stack to be, I want to say, about 35% of what it started out as.
Mm-hmm.
It literally fits under the seat in a passenger vehicle.
Right, right.
And hence they're using less platinum. The
That's
other
right.
thing is
That's very true.
platinum's not expensive anymore. I mean, it's expensive, but
That's
you
very
know,
true. Yes.
yeah, for my whole life, platinum was more expensive than gold, and it was it was hard to get.
Right.
Now platinum's half the price of gold, and
Right.
apparently not that hard to find.
Yeah. So I have some friends who are very fond of precious metals. So they insist that, well, the platinum has to come back up because goodness knows gold can't actually be less expensive than it is. Um, An amusing thing is, so again, I started to work on fuel cells as an intern about 25 years ago, and back then we would if you imagine putting jam, like a thick layer of jam or peanut butter on a slice of bread, that's kind of what we did with the platinum back in the day. It was a lot. And over time, you instead of using platinum particles, you use little tiny platinum particles on top of a carbon surface. And there are other advantages that allow you to get the reactions you want, the performance you want without using as much platinum. The interesting thing on the platinum side is that, well, the world is moving away from combustion, which uses a lot of platinum in terms of cleaning things up. And
Right.
so 25 years ago, I remember one person was tasked with, doing a rough estimate. Is there enough platinum in the world to supply fuel cell vehicles? In this case, I think the amount of platinum in use for fuel cell vehicles is still going to be higher than the amount in a catalytic converter. But the ability for batteries to soak up a lot of, especially the light duty vehicle sides, means that a lot of platinum's industrial use is going away, so it's less expensive. Um, I understand that platinum trade groups are hoping for an upsurge in platinum jewelry to
Right.
keep prices higher.
Well, and it's funny because again, only because I know I've actually played this experiment out in the last 60 days, but you still go into any jewelry store and they don't want to talk to you about bullion price. They want to, platinum's always been more expensive,
Right.
significantly more expensive than gold.
That's right.
At one point, white gold was more expensive than yellow gold, which is crazy because it's polluted yellow gold.
Right. Yes.
So a lot of times, and my point here is in a lot of industries, we see pricing that doesn't necessarily reflect scarcity.
Right. That's right. Yeah. So there's always consumer demand or consumer taste. Like, hey, back in the day, lobster and crab were the poor person's seafood. Now they're like the delicacy, which really makes no sense because if you're in a business, if you're at a fancy business dinner, do you really want to have your food all over your decent suit and shirt? Like, kind of
Right.
strange.
It it's wonderful, but it's messy. Okay, fine.
So I guess one other thing which might be of interest to the listeners is so much like Tesla has its whole product solution, vehicles augmented by chargers. Um, then Nikola, of course, is looking at producing battery electric and fuel cell vehicles and setting up an extensive infrastructure of fueling stations. Now, its first stations, large stations, will be they'll be performing water electrolysis, cheap power from renewables, plus perhaps a bit from the grid, to produce hydrogen on site or very close to the fueling station. Now, they estimated in their documentation that they could get the cost of hydrogen down to like $2.50 per kilogram of hydrogen, which is before depreciation. So at a certain point, you can depreciate all your expenses for capital costs, and then they get back down to this $2.50 per kilogram level. Now, hydrogen is a little bit more. It's about 33 kilowatt hours per kilogram. So that's maybe like 8 to 9 cents per kilowatt hour. Mind you, you will get a hit on the efficiency for forward motion. So maybe you're on the order of like 15 to 20 cents per kilowatt hour of forward motion to make it comparable to a battery electric vehicle. Now, the very interesting thing about California, which is just truly fascinating, it helps the electric vehicle sector as well, the battery sector as well, is that California has what we call a low carbon fuel standard. And what it is, it's a regulation that tells fuel companies you have to have a certain amount of renewable or zero emission content in your fuel. At the moment, this is very hard to do because oil is oil, and there's only so much you can do in terms of like getting renewable natural gas, say, to help upgrade your oil. There is a market for there's a carbon market for low LCFS credits, low carbon fuel standard credits, and the price of those credits is on the order of $200 US per avoided ton of CO2. Now, here in BC, we're like we have no major corporate headquarters, but we're the founding place of Greenpeace. So we have a carbon tax which is probably on the order of $25 to $30 US, probably close to 25 US per ton of carbon. And even here, it would be very difficult politically to get a carbon tax through the legislature and keep having governments getting reelected if they said, oh, let's raise the carbon price to $200 a ton. The magic of this low carbon fuel standard is that even though California doesn't have a carbon tax, this sector of the economy has basically created this carbon market where your offsets are $200 US per ton of CO2 if you can displace liquid fuels. This has been used for the use of, say, renewable energy to provide credits for people who charge electric vehicles as opposed to combusting fossil fuels. And $200 a ton of CO2, when you work out the avoided emissions from avoiding diesel, that's like a couple bucks per kilogram of hydrogen. So one interesting possibility for Nikola, not scalable to the full states, of course, because California is the only one with this regulation. But in the early days, when its electrolysis and hydrogen costs are going to be higher than because they're just starting out, they're just scaling up, they should be able to capitalize on this regulation in order to keep a sort of a total cost of ownership competitive hydrogen price for their customers, even in this earlier stage when their renewables and their hydrogen cost is higher than their target of like $250 after depreciation. So it's a really powerful regulation. Almost no one knows about it, but it's truly magical in terms of the changes that it can provide.
And again, creating diversity, encouraging diversity in that sector is a good thing. You can argue, one can always argue that, well, this is better, so this is the only thing we should support, but that's generally not a great long-term strategy.
Right. And and besides which, e-bikes are going to dominate us all, really. So it's not a good bet for the BEV fan to take.
It's a friend of mine was asking me, do you have any insight into fuel cell like quads, like recreational vehicles? The little like, is anybody working on anything like that?
So I have seen the little test programs for like bicycles or quads, things of that sort. I think the challenge there is that the product volumes are low enough that If you want to do a design around a quad like an ATV,
Hmm.
then the cost of doing that, like you have to be sure that you're going to sell a gazillion of these to pay for your program cost to develop the fuel cell architecture. Um, because fuel cells, so batteries are relatively simple in that all the reactants are contained inside the pouch or inside the cell.
Right.
Fuel cells are different in that they're like batteries with an external fuel and air pack. So you have to be able to pump air in, you have to be able to pump the hydrogen into the fuel cell to get the reactions. And so it is a much more complicated field.
Hmm.
Um, One interesting thing is, for example, with drones, because fuel cells with hydrogen, you can get typically it's quoted like three times the flight time that
Wow.
you can get with a battery system. Again, because the weight difference eventually impedes the battery solution. That can be very important if you're using drones to inspect a pipeline or a wind turbine or something of that sort. So and then the fast refueling is also you can be remote and then you just have a hydrogen tank, you fill it up real quick. Now the challenge with drones is that the fuel cells are so small. It's
Yeah.
like you would um, the cost of re-engineering and making a second generation drone architecture are such that it would be a very tough challenge for a company to actually make a profit doing that. I think the GMC Astrovan has like not changed a model for like 12 years or something. It's like the record holder for the oldest vehicle architecture out there. It's like those kind of it's like kind of the creepy looking vans, that not the
Yeah.
cool
Yeah.
ones that the 18 used to drive, but the very utilitarian Astravans. So
Yeah.
I think those have been using the same chassis for 12 or 14 years. Same kind of a thing. If you have drones, you are unlikely to have a fuel cell redesign for many years because you still have to pay off the development costs for that first engineering effort.
Wow. Wow.
Mhm.
Well, I want to let's wrap this up. Any final thoughts,
Sure.
Matthew? Anything we haven't talked about, or
Not well. I mean, there's so much going
there's
on up
so
here,
much,
but
right?
yes, I guess not too much. I guess I'll mention that if people have questions about the Nikola or other stuff, I'm on Twitter at electroncom COMM. Now I have been trying since December. I sort of took an early Lent before Christmas to try and reduce my social media usage, and so my 3 months are up. I feel much less jaded, but I am trying to gingerly make my way back into the social media chaos. But happy
I
to
thought
answer
you'd
any
been
questions
quiet.
people might have. Sorry?
I thought you'd been kind of quiet.
That's right. Yes, it's a deliberate effort, and I don't know. I feel cleansed, but it's time to get dirty again.
Electron.com, COMM is
Uh,
where you find.
Electrons.com. There's no dot in there, but
Oh,
the
excuse me,
Twitter.
Electron.com. You're absolutely
That's right.
right.
On Twitter there. Yeah, that's right.
Why would I put the dot in there? Like
Yeah, that website was too expensive for me to buy, sadly. So.
I say that often. I wish. Oh, I don't. Is where you can connect with Matthew and follow him. And if you're not following him on Twitter, you should because when he's talking, he says a lot of great stuff. Now, I
Thank
just
you.
went through 3 months of relative radio silence. He's still a great follow. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for
Oh,
coming on
thank you.
today and going
You're
into the
welcome.
Nikola stuff. I
Sure.
love the idea of little miniature fuel cells and drones. I don't know
Hmm.
why. Just it's so cute. But
Yes.
I, again, I'm fascinated by uh, our ability to deploy different technologies for different purposes,
Mhm.
or even different technologies for the same purpose, and get results that are tailored for specific users.
Right.
That's a wonderful. I
So,
mean, I can imagine that no matter how expensive fuel cell powered drones are, the military probably loves that idea.
that is one of the early adopter markets.
Right. You
That
could
is
keep the
correct.
thing up nearly 24 hours a day, and
Right.
you know, you're not
Fast
carrying around
refueling. You
battery
don't have to worry
packs.
about any. Yeah, that's right.
Now you're carrying around hydrogen, but
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, not to extend this too long, but when you're scouting out wind farm sites, you actually, unlike a solar farm where you can download everything, all the data you need from the internet, from NOAA and other satellite records, you actually have to have a unit in the field, a little tower that measures the wind speed, and those tend to be remote sites without power yet, and so they often use small low-powered fuel cells with enormous fuel tanks in order to meet the power needs of the site for the 1+ years during which they do data collection. So yeah, all sorts of different little niches.
It's a wonderful thing. That's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew, as always, thank you. Incredibly informative, super helpful, and it's always fun to chat with you. You need to come on the show and just randomly comment on the news with us sometime soon.
Sure, absolutely. Happy to do so. Thanks for having me there, Russell. It's always fun. And if you guys feel the need to move north after the 2020 election, I'll bring my group of politically impotent friends together, and we'll see what you can do.
I would
rather.
I have no comment on that other than to say thank you for your offer. I'm going to take it as a genuine one.
Right.
There we go. Well, thanks everybody for watching. And once again, Matthew Klippenstein, you can follow him at ElectronComm, COMM on Twitter. And you know where we are because we're always in the same place, at What Drives Us. Until next week, drive safe. See you, everybody. Thanks for watching and listening.
Thanks.